What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There is something misleading about mainstream media news, because an event can dominate the morning headlines and then just disappear a week later, even though the reality it created may remain for years, especially in modern Russia, where yesterday's emergency becomes tomorrow's normal life. That is exactly why the recent strikes on Wildberries warehouses matter way beyond the image of fire and destroyed goods. Wildberries, by the way, if some of you guys don't know, it's just some sort of Amazon of Russia. And so another facility may be affected tomorrow, then another, until a burning logistics center becomes ordinary. Not because the damage is less serious, but because the public becomes exhausted of these attacks. Customers lower their expectations that maybe things will not be delivered, and the country adapts to conditions that sounded impossible only a few years ago. Just think about oil refineries attacks. They barely even make the news in Russia already, and when the first ones happened, it was almost the world news. The most revealing detail is that Wildberries appears to have understood this early, because weeks before the strikes, the company revised its public offer agreement and removed responsibility for products destroyed by quote-unquote through kinetic action, including drone strikes, with the new terms in effect on July 7th, while Ozon, Russia's eBay, made a similar change shortly afterward. Neither company has a foreign intelligence service, undercover agents in Kyiv or secret Ukrainian plans, but both watched Ukraine's long-range capabilities grow and concluded that logistics hubs were becoming realistic targets, meaning private businesses prepared for a new reality, while the Kremlin insisted that everything, guess what, remained under control. A year and a half ago, Vladimir Putin was reportedly offered an unusually favorable opportunity to end the war with, you know who. Yet he chose further escalation. And every additional month has since created another disruption that Russians now are expected to just simply absorb. So today, we are going to examine the new reality emerging across Russia in the summer of 2026, from warehouses and fuel prices to electricity heating, internet access, and the possibility that the coming fall and winter may bring consequences many people still struggle to even imagine. And before I proceed, guys, if you ever wanted to shop around for the Russian dude merch, including this iconic yellow hoodie, whether for yourself or as a present for your friends or relatives, now's a very good opportunity and time. We have a spinning wheel right now on the website, so that allows you to win some discounts, and also every single Patreon member gets a discount as well. Combined with free trial on our Patreon memberships, that's literally just free money. All the links are down below, thanks so much. Now, let's begin. At the beginning of 2022, even Russians who understood the danger could hardly imagine hundreds or even thousands of drones moving towards Russian territory. Air defenses operating around Moscow airports repeatedly restricted, and citizens checking overnight strike reports like just some kind of weather updates, because this sounded more like a low-budget science fiction story about an alien invasion. Unmanned aerial vehicle technology was advancing, and a limited attack by an extremist organization was understandable, conceivable, but a daily strategic campaign across the country would have sounded absurd. That is why only something unusual still breaks through the background noise. And a warehouse containing goods worth of tens of billions of rubles can capture attention today, yes, but even that threshold will eventually move if similar incidents continue happening. Because one warehouse feels extraordinary, 10 warehouses become just a trend, and after enough repetition the trend just becomes a simple routine. Once again, the story with refineries. This is how an entire industry can suffer a major setback without remaining at the center of public conversation. There is also an uncomfortable symmetry, because the Russian military has repeatedly struck warehouses and sorting centers belonging to Nova Poshta, the Ukrainian postal and delivery company, especially in the beginning of this war, while arguing that this infrastructure may have a dual-use function and can therefore be treated as a military target. That argument may look orderly on the paper, but the broader discussion about limits was damaged early in the invasion, when Russian rocket artillery struck Kharkiv, aerial bombs landed in residential neighborhoods, and attacks on electricity and heating systems openly pressured Ukrainian civilians during winter. Once a government decides that disrupting heat, power, and urban life is an acceptable instrument of war, it becomes much harder for that same government to persuade its opponent that Russian infrastructure must remain protected by principles Moscow itself treated as optional. Putin launched this war and established the practical standards, so Ukraine's responses now only make sense. It's just now shaped less by Russian diplomatic complaints and more by capability, necessity, and willingness. This does not mean every Ukrainian action is automatically justified or that civilian suffering becomes acceptable simply because Russia caused suffering first. But it does mean outrage from Moscow carries little influence in Kiev. If Ukraine concludes that a warehouse with people's personal online orders, oil refineries, power substations, or logistics centers supports the Russian military effort and has the means to reach them, those targets, the decisive question is not whether the Russian foreign ministry will protest, because, well, guess what, it certainly will, but whether those protests can alter Ukraine's calculations further. And that leads us directly to the part of these stories that may define the next season. Because warehouses can be rebuilt and insurance terms rewritten, but when energy infrastructure becomes the center of a sustained campaign, the consequences move from delayed online orders into every single apartment. Now imagine this. Summer heat still covers cities such as St. Petersburg, so losing heat during winter feels still distant. Yet, the preparations shaping November, December, and January are being made before the first freezing night. The most serious potential change is not another damaged warehouse or airport closure, but a campaign against energy facilities using Ukrainian drones, cruise missiles, and perhaps even potentially ballistic missiles. Because if it becomes sustained, some Russian cities could face the very same fear Ukrainian cities have faced since 2022, whether electricity, water, and central heating will remain available when temperatures fall. The danger is especially serious in Soviet-era prefabricated residential buildings, where poor insulation, aging pipes, and centralized systems can turn a heating failure into a much larger emergency. Because once a building loses heat for long enough, guess what? Water can and will freeze. That's why repairs will become much more difficult, and apartments may feel even colder than the air outside, like little fridge. Ruslan Leviev, a foreign agent in Russia, has argued that deliberately freezing civilians in their homes would constitute a serious violation of the laws of conflict. And that distinction matters because ordinary Russian people do not become acceptable targets simply because their government began the conflict. Dmitry Kiselyov, Russian propagandist, in return spoke approvingly about damaging Ukrainian critical infrastructure and described time as Russia's ally. While the broader message was that electricity, central heating, water, and sewage service would gradually become unaffordable luxuries. Evgenia Petrukhina then, and other mainstream television figures treated the humiliation of Ukrainian civilians as just a material for mockery, discussing people charging phones in stores, eating by candlelight, shaving beside an ATM because that's where electricity was apparently still available, or trying to dry their hair over a gas cooker. Those segments may have entertained a domestic Z audience, but Ukrainians did not forget them, especially when the same conditions produce carbon monoxide poisoning from generators used incorrectly. One reported case involved a woman from Belgorodka who ended up in a hospital after misusing a generator, which is why these devices cannot safely operate overnight or inside an unventilated basement, where emergency equipment can become, as pretty much as you can see, an invisible threat. Ukraine's willingness to consider responding against Russian energy infrastructure did not appear recently, did not appear in 2026. No, it dates back to 2022, when Russia first tried to use freezing temperatures as leverage against Ukrainian society. For years, Ukraine lacked sufficient reach and volume, but rapid development in long-range munitions has changed that balance. And the question is no longer whether Ukraine can reach any Russian energy facility, but how many systems it can deploy, what targets it can prioritize, and whether Western political pressure limits this campaign. The government in Kiev may still decide that broad attacks on heating and electricity are strategically unwise, politically damaging, or inefficient just use of scarce weapons, which in some case, in some understanding, may be true, especially from military position. This is a forecast based on a capability and precedent, not inside information, but it cannot be dismissed by saying something will not happen simply because it just feels too extreme. Northern Crimea already offers a preview of how infrastructure disruption changes everyday life, because damaged systems have left residents facing problems with electricity, water, and central heating. Yet, many Russians still struggle to imagine similar conditions inside internationally recognized Russian borders. That psychological barrier is understandable, but it is not protection. And what feels unthinkable in July 2026 can become a regional emergency in winter, especially when aging infrastructure once again fails at the same time that external pressure increases. And before winter arrives, another crisis now shows how quickly Russians learn to treat the abnormal as just regular or ordinary. Let's talk about it right now. Here is the catch. When crisis lasts long enough, people do not necessarily solve it. They simply reorganize lives around it. And that is exactly what appears to be happening with Russia's fuel problems. Because the issue is disappearing from the main conversation, even though it has not disappeared from actual real gas stations. It has not disappeared from household budgets or regional supply chains. News programs cannot repeat the same shortage every day without losing all the audience. But drivers still need fuel, and businesses still need to move goods from A to Z. On Peekaboo, often described as Russia's equivalent of Reddit, users have casually discussed petrol prices, ranging from 70 to now 240 rubles on average per liter, at stations in mainland Russia that still have supplies. While one resident of Yalta reportedly purchased petrol for a record 450 rubles per liter. In 2021, numbers like these would have produced disbelief in a country presenting itself as an energy superpower, but in 2026, they are beginning to merge into the background, not because 450 rubles per liter is normal, but because the definition of normal has been repeatedly lowered. The same pattern appears in almost every major subject since the invasion began. International companies left Russia and most have never returned, yet their departure no longer creates daily headlines because consumers simply found substitutions. They might have even accepted just even lower quality or paid more through parallel imports or even stopped expecting the old products altogether. McDonald's, for example, disappeared and was replaced by a Russian imitation called Tasty Period. That's the actual name. I'm not kidding. And after the first wave of comparisons, the replacement became the ordinary part of life. The mobilized records offer a darker example, because several 100,000 Russian citizens were pulled into military service under conditions giving them little meaningful ability to live, while 4 years later those who are still alive remain trapped in the very same system. There is no dramatic daily update because the condition itself has become permanent, and the lack of new information makes the story appear old, even though the people inside it still live the very same reality every single day. Internet and mobile service outages followed by the same path, because the first disruption creates panic, the second produces anger, and eventually people simply just started to download VPNs. They started carrying cash and warn relatives that messages may not arrive on time. The conversation moves on, but the restrictions remain, which is why measuring Russia only through the newest headlines is so misleading. Because all problems do not end when a new story appears. They just stack on top of one another. On July 21st, 2006, Russian singer Dima Bilan released one of his signature songs with the line, "I know that impossible is possible." And 20 years later, in 2026, a lyric that sounded optimistic has acquired an ominous meaning. Because in today's Russia, the impossible is no longer a promise of success, but a warning that almost any disruption can eventually become real. Mobilization happened, businesses left, drones reached deep into Russia, internet access became unstable, fuel reached absurd prices, and marketplaces rewrote agreements to account for so-called kinetic action. And once impossibility becomes routine, the next question is what happened to the stability Putin promised so much. Now this is what changed everything. For more than 20 years, Vladimir Putin and United Russia built their legitimacy around the promise of stability, telling citizens that they might not have meaningful political competition, independent television, or real influence over national decisions, but at least in exchange they would receive predictability, functioning services, and protection from the chaos associated with the 1990s. Well, fast forward 36 years later, That bargain was never as complete as the Kremlin claimed. Surprise, surprise. Yet millions accepted it, because avoiding disruption seemed more important than changing the whole system. Now the Kremlin has replaced stability with action, sacrifice, confrontation, and endurance, while Putin himself has suggested that stability can be boring. As though the destruction of one old social contract is not a failure but a form of national excitement. The government can no longer promise that tomorrow will resemble yesterday, so it must persuade people that deterioration is evidence of historical importance, while inconvenience becomes patriotism and uncertainty becomes proof that Russia is challenging the world. The problem is that a prolonged war cannot remain at a fixed level of manageable discomfort, because military spending competes with civilian priorities, sanctions distort supply chains, labor shortages spread, and every new Ukrainian capability creates another category of Russian target. Even if the front line barely moves, the internal consequences continue moving, meaning that Russia cannot reach a stable platform called bad but predictable and remain there indefinitely. There is a political advantage in this constant movement as well, because when emergencies overlap, responsibility becomes very difficult to focus on. A fuel shortage can be blamed on logistics, an internet outage described as security, a warehouse fire attributed to air defense debris falling, and higher prices explained as just temporary market conditions, even though all may share one underlying cause, one single one. A war Putin chose to begin and continues to expand. Ahead of the general election, the government's practical promise is no longer that life will improve, but that citizens must remain patient while conditions become more difficult. And the message sounds increasingly simple. It will get worse, so guys, get ready, endure it. That is a remarkable reversal for a regime that's presenting itself as a guardian of normal life, because the Kremlin now campaigns not on prosperity or peace, but on the idea that suffering is unavoidable, and questioning it helps the enemy. Yet propaganda has limits when physical reality enters every single home, because a television presenter can explain away a price increase. They'll come up with something quote-unquote smart, but the presenter cannot make a cold radiator warm. He cannot reopen an airport or deliver a package destroyed in a warehouse. It's gone, that's it. The more consequences become personal, the harder it is to maintain the illusion that the war exists somewhere else, somewhere far away, and affects only soldiers, border regions, or some kind of abstract numbers. That is exactly why the coming winter may most likely will test Putin's system more seriously than another headline ever could. There is this one final thing you just need to know before we continue. Predicting a winter energy crisis in Russia is not the same as claiming that it will definitely happen, because the Ukrainian government may decide not to use valuable long-range drones, cruise missiles or ballistic missiles against heating and electricity systems, while technical limitations, Russian air defenses, Western pressure and strategic priorities may reduce the scale of such a campaign. I mean, just no responsible analysis should ever claim to know plans that the Ukrainian military has never shared. But uncertainty about one exact scenario does not remove the broader direction, because the Putin-led war keeps creating new risks even when a particular prediction proves wrong. Perhaps Russian cities will avoid widespread heating failure this winter, but refineries may face way more damage, mobile internet restrictions may spread, and shortages may appear in industries that currently seem protected. The point is not that one specific disaster is guaranteed, but that Russia has entered a system where bad outcomes multiply, and the government has no credible plan to reverse the process without ending the war. Every month of escalation gives Ukraine greater incentives to develop longer-range weapons, gives Russian companies more reason to prepare for disruption, and gives the federal budget another reason to prioritize military needs over civilian life. Russian citizens should not assume internationally recognized borders create some kind of a technical shield against the war, because drones do not respond simply to political television, missiles do not care how maps are presented on state media, and infrastructure built decades ago does not become stronger simply because officials call the country resilient. Russia, yes, may intercept many incoming systems, but no air defense network provides perfect protection across such a big, the biggest country in the world, especially when possible targets include refineries, warehouses, military factories, logistics centers appearing across thousands of kilometers in thousands of numbers. Ordinary Russians are making the same calculations without corporate language, deciding whether to keep more cash, fill the petrol tank earlier, purchase a generator, download another VPN, or simply move relatives away from regions containing. Each decision seems small, but together they reveal a society preparing for instability while being told that the state remains strong. The most dangerous effect may be psychological, because once people accept that anything can literally happen, they may become cautious but also politically passive, believing that no action can ever restore normal life and survival simply depends and solely depends on the personal adaptation. That resignation helps the Kremlin in the short term, because exhausted citizens are less likely to organize around every single failure. Yet, it weakens the state over time as trust disappears and official workarounds replace institutions and people stop believing official promises before they are even made. So the real test of winter will not only be how many facilities are affected or how many hours of region loses electricity, but whether 4 years of accumulated disruption finally breaks through the emotional numbness created by constant crisis. A warehouse strike can be forgotten, a petrol station and petrol prices can be tolerated, and an internet even outage can be bypassed, but when those events connect into one single picture, it becomes much harder to pretend that they are isolated incidents. Guys, please subscribe to our channel, like this video if today's discussion helped you understand why these events matter beyond one single headline and news cycle, because more important developments are coming. And in future videos, we will continue connecting the headlines to the deeper political, economic, and human consequences the Kremlin would rather keep hidden. All useful links, Patreon, merch, PayPal donations, all of them are down below. Guys, thanks so much for watching. See you on Monday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.